Okay, hello everybody. Hopefully everything's sounding okay. I was a little bit late starting right now. Yeah, feeling a little bit famished today. I don't know why. I went for a little walk and then started feeling a little bit tired and yeah, started feeling a little bit hungry and I ate a bunch of food and hopefully that kind of got things going. So if I'm a little bit off today, yeah, I apologize. And obviously, apologize for those who tuned in last week. The show was canceled. Things are getting pretty busy, obviously, and like doing these weekly shows, and I have a bunch of weekly things going on. Definitely takes a lot out of me sometimes. So I appreciate those who were patient and decided to come back this time. So I think there's actually a couple people watching right now, which is great. If you guys are new to this, welcome to Casey Lee Live Software Edition. This is kind of a session that every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern we kind of get together and we talk about software topics, whether that be live coding sessions or whether that be a formal kind of lesson or just kind of a general Q&A. Now after that, we definitely do a live Q&A afterwards, regardless of whatever the topic is or whatever. So hello to Ricky again. Ricky is a regular viewer now every Thursday, which is great. I really appreciate the dedication, Ricky. Ricky's somebody I met a long time ago. Commander Puggle is in town. It's Andrew. I believe Andrew from work. I will keep his last name private in case he doesn't want to mention it. But yeah, somebody I work with, or maybe it's a different Andrew. I'm not too sure. Never know I don't know, these not avatar names, pseudonyms or whatever. But anyways, thanks everybody for joining us. If you're new to this, a couple things to get off the right off the bat. One, this is live and it's public. It is Andrew from the office. So definitely, keep in mind that your comments are recorded. And they're out there live. So if you have any privacy concerns or whatever, just be careful with what you chat in there, what you put there. Shadow Man is back. Appreciate Shadow Man joining us. Lots of people joining today. I'm pretty happy actually because I was afraid that because I took last week off that people I would lose the steam and people would forget about it. Sean Floyd is in the house. Wow, I haven't heard from Sean in a long time either. Well, I don't know why this week in particular. I don't know if it's I don't know why this week in particular everyone happened to hear about it. I'm definitely happy to hear why you guys decided to join this week versus previous weeks. I know everyone's busy and everything like that, but always curious if it's for like you guys heard about it on LinkedIn or from other people or whatever. Always curious. So. Uh, 5 minutes in, this is already like the most chat we've not the most chat we've had, but definitely very busy. So welcome everybody. Back to what I was saying, your comments are recorded, so if you have any privacy concerns, maybe keep your comments to yourself. Not only are they recorded here, but when people watch the video later, they can replay the live video chat and stuff like that. So just keep the privacy in mind, and obviously be respectful to everybody here. So, push notification, and Commander Puckle's drinking beer. That's great. So. Other than that, if you guys are new to this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you can be notified anytime these live streams happen. And again, if you're new, there are two streams that I do. I do the software edition where it's all focused about software lessons, software topics, that kind of stuff. And then I also have my live concert, which happens on Saturdays every now and then. It's not as regular as the software edition. So just so you know that there's a difference. Like the concert is literally me playing guitar, whereas this is me talking about software concepts. So obviously everybody's welcome to both, but not if you're in it for the software, the concert might not intrigue you as much as this. So yes, if you're new to this, what we do is we spend usually anywhere between an hour and a half doing some kind of formal lesson. I'm kind of used to traditional kind of like university style lecture, so I'll kind of give a lesson or whatever. And to be honest, it depends a little bit on the week, how much effort I decide to put into those things. But hopefully people still get some knowledge out of that. So usually I cover some kind of formal topic. And then after that, it's kind of an open Q&A. I mean, you can ask anything really during the formal lesson as well, but after that, it's open to any questions at all. We try to stay software focused, but obviously anything too about running a business, starting a startup, any advice at all. This kind of started as a general kind of ask me anything AMA or Q&A. That's how things actually started, but then people wanted people enjoyed the formal lessons aspect of it, so I kind of went that direction at some point. So still doing that. Again, best way to communicate with me is either through this chat or just leaving comments on the videos afterwards. If you ever miss the live stream here, you can always go onto the video afterwards and view it, and you can still leave comments at that point. So if you guys come up with a topic or something that you'd like to see, definitely do not hesitate to reach out to me. My Twitter handle is also there. You can follow me or tweet at me for any suggestions there. Past couple weeks, a lot of the suggestions have come out of the end of this session. Like, we'll spend half an hour or so chatting at the end, and a lot of the lessons came out of that. A lot of the kind of ideas for the lessons kind of came out of that. So again, welcome back, everybody. Again, definitely appreciate the regular viewers. Again, definitely recognize Ricky and Shadowman being here regularly. I know Commander Puggle's been here before, and happy to see old acquaintances like Sean Floyd. Last week we had very old colleague of mine. He's not very old, but like I hadn't seen him in a long time. Bob joined us, which was really great. So lots of really great stuff there. And we are still also again looking for other ideas on things to do here. So always keep that coming. At any point, even when I switch away from the chat, like for example, if I go to like my desktop here, you can still message and chat. Obviously, you guys can chat among yourselves, but also I still have the window off on another screen here, so I'll try to keep an eye on that. And obviously, there is a little bit of a delay. YouTube streaming. I mean, my computer combined with my internet connection combined with YouTube streaming in general, there is this kind of natural delay that happens to kind of keep a certain quality as well. So yeah, do know that even though you message, it may be 30 seconds, a minute, sometimes even 2 minutes after you post that I actually see it and that it actually kind of comes up. So, okay. So again, feel free guys to leave some messages there. I'm happy everybody's saying hi already. Dave Chapman's there. Dave knows Sean. Huh. I don't think I knew that you guys knew each other. That's really cool. Have to link up those things later. And obviously, Dave, a huge influence on my software career. I've always looked up to Dave. Always called Dave one of the best software engineers I've ever met, if not the best software engineer I've ever met. So if you guys ever get a chance, network with Dave, talk to Dave. We're still hoping to get him on here. I actually interviewed him in one of the podcast episodes that I did. Little plug for my podcast, Casey Talks to People. Dave has had a huge influence on a lot of what I do. He's one of these software engineers who's more than just an amazing coder. He has really great philosophies about how to approach software, and he'll say a very casual statement in his work that I have lived by long after our time together. So yeah, that's great. Okay, so I think we're just gonna jump into this. So last week we started down the road of React. Previous to that, we kind of did a kind of a baseline primer to how to set up React. And to be honest, if you haven't seen that, I'm particularly proud of that lesson because I myself learned a lot in that. I learned a lot about what was the statement. Shadowman's curious about what are some of the casual statements that Dave mentions. There's a couple, but the one that comes to mind is Dave Chapman at one point. We were in some meeting or whatever, and he talked about the philosophy of a particular piece of software. So when you're building a product, when you're building, whether it be a website or a web app or a mobile app or whatever, one of the things that is always really good to do is to learn about accepting feedback and hearing feedback and getting customer reactions and customer feedback to kind of drive your product forward, right? And so you always want to listen to your users and see what they're saying and see what you're telling them to what they're telling you to do. And one of the things you have to keep in mind is your customers and your users are going to tell you a lot of different things. I mean, if you're lucky to get any decent user, they're going to tell you a lot of different things. And it's always like the things that they're telling you are always good feedback to hear and always good to process that feedback. But you always have to weigh it against what the philosophy behind your product is. What is your product trying to be, and what is your product trying to do? And that can definitely change over time. It's not like it's fixed in stone or it's rigid. But if that philosophy changes, that it's usually an educated change that's based on feedback and stuff like that. So as more feedback comes in, you might decide to sway it a little bit. But having a guiding philosophy behind what the product does and what the product is and what you want it to be can really help you process that feedback. So I remember I was in a meeting with Dave, and Dave said something along the lines of like, is this really what we want the product to do? What's the philosophy behind the product? And that's always stuck with me, about having this philosophy behind the product that you're trying to build. So that's definitely a very very important thing to have. It doesn't mean it's rigid. It doesn't mean you don't listen to customer feedback, but it means you have something as a basis that helps guide your decisions. But that basis itself can change based on the feedback that comes in. But if you don't have that philosophy at all and you don't have that baseline, then you might just accept every bit of feedback that comes in, and your product just keeps on changing. So that was the statement that I still live by, or try to live by today. So okay, back to React. So we were talking a couple weeks ago about Webpack and Node and building these kind of modern JavaScript applications. And we talked about how Webpack is this powerful tool that can basically bundle up your JavaScript and transpile the JavaScript using loaders to output JavaScript that most browsers will understand. So it allows you to code in modern JavaScript, but it ultimately outputs to JavaScript that most browsers will understand. So that was the power of Webpack. And we learned that Webpack can actually do a lot more than that as well, based on, again, the different loaders that you use. So we kind of set up a basic React project. And then last week, we actually started diving into React, and we built our first component. And the interesting thing about React and other similar frameworks, I have never used them, so I can't honestly say that, but I get the feeling that it's similar to other frameworks, is React is one of these things that has some strong principles that you should live by in the beginning, and then has some other strong principles that you'll kind of learn and realize the power of them later on. So when you start coding in React, we start to talk about these key principles like props and state. And those are really powerful things, and they will help us build really rich user interfaces. But beyond that, React gets really powerful in the sense that it's basically a way for you to build reusable components. Or the best way I can think of it is custom HTML elements, right? So you have HTML elements like anchors and H1 tags and UL, unordered lists and list items and these kind of things. But React actually allows you to build your own custom ones with their own custom functionality, right? Like, for example, an anchor tag has this functionality where if you put an href on it and you click on it, it goes to a page, right? Well, you can build your own custom kind of component that does something when you click on it, things like that, right? Now, that comes a little bit later in your realization of using React, but it's kind of hard, or at least it's hard for me to put that into a formal lesson. And I think what's best is we kind of just code more and more together, and we'll kind of see these things in action. So we're gonna continue down this road of React and just kind of continue this coding exercise. And I think what we're gonna do again over the next couple of weeks is just do more and more React to kind of realize kind of its potential and its power. So So let's dive into that. So okay, so here is where we were last time. So what we had done is we set up this React setup folder. This is part of the lesson that we did on Node and Webpack and all that stuff. And what we had done is we had set up Webpack in a pretty simple way. We did our own configuration, but it was actually a really basic configuration in the sense that we had 3 entry points. So we had 3 JavaScript files that we were going to code: about.js, contact.js, and home.js. And what that was going to do is it was going to output the compiled, transpiled version of those into the dist folder, and it would name them. The dist folder here, and it would name them based on what we called them here: about, contact, and home. So basically, about, contact, and home would get compiled or transpiled into, again, JavaScript that a regular web browser would understand. So about.js, contact.js, and home.js. And that's how that would all work. So we started coding, like, for example, about.js here. We have this console.log, and then it got transpiled into actually this big piece of code right here. And same thing goes for contact and about. Contact and home. So that's where we kind of left off. And once that's kind of set up, once you kind of have Webpack set up, and you know that Shadowman missed the last stream. No, you're not screwed. You can still follow along. I'm kind of recapping right now. But once you kind of have Webpack set up, basically you can stop thinking about the output. Okay, I mean, it's nice to know in the background that what's actually happening here is that anytime you run yarn Webpack, okay, so we had this set up and we did yarn Webpack. The good thing to know about that is what's happening is Webpack is going through your source folder, going through all these files, and converting this modern JavaScript into regular JavaScript that most browsers understand. Okay, so all this stuff here. Okay, and so Yarn Webpack does that for you. And once last week we also looked into the Webpack dev server, which is a really nice little tool that actually monitors your source folder or whatever, however you have it configured. Like, it monitors your entry points basically. And if you've changed anything in those entry points or anything that they depend on, it automatically recompiles it for you. So rather than you having to type yarn Webpack every single time you make a change and reloading the page, it would actually automatically recompile it for you. And then even further than that, it does 2 more things that are really powerful. So Webpack Dev Server not only monitors your folder and automatically recompiles it into the dist folder, the second thing it does is it actually starts up a mini web server on your machine. So if you go way back to one of the lessons, like, I don't know how long ago now, we talked about web servers and how web servers are basically little programs that are running, waiting for a web request, right? So what it's going to do is it's actually going to take all your files in your dist folder, again, depending on how you have it configured. So we said the dev server is going to serve up whatever's in the dist folder. That's right there. And it's going to take all those files and serve them up on a little web server. So what you can do is then you can call localhost 8080 and hit any of those pages. Basically, you're making a request to that web server to grab a page or grab a JavaScript file or whatever, right? So that's the second powerful thing that the Webpack dev server does. It actually spins up a little mini web server so you can actually run it through regular HTTP protocol rather than opening up the file in HTML, or opening it through Firefox or Chrome or whatever. Okay, that's the second powerful thing. And then the third powerful thing it does is, what's really cool is that if you are connected to that web server via, going through like localhost or whatever, anytime you make a change to any of your entry points causing Webpack to recompile your code, what the browser will do is it will automatically refresh the page for you, which is really cool. So it basically saves you from having to hit refresh every time you do it, right? So this is kind of called like hot reloading or live reloading. It's becoming a pretty popular trend in a lot of frameworks these days. So that's where we were last week. Okay, so we basically set up Webpack to understand React. Then we talked about how Webpack can compile React code, and amongst other things like React ES20 15 code, module packaging, all that stuff. And then we talked about how the Webpack dev server actually helps us with this, so that we can just edit our code and it'll automatically refresh and automatically recompile everything. Okay. Once you have that set up, regular day-to-day coding, you don't really need to concern yourself with the output. Okay, you just know that you're coding and it's going to output and it's going to work that way. Okay, so I'm just going to minimize that dist folder. I'm going to start up the dev server. Okay, and then once we're kind of in that mode, we don't really have to concern ourselves with this. But I'll do one more demo just to show you exactly what I was talking about. So, okay, so we're connected here. So if we go to the home page here, okay, and what we have is we have a home.js which is being loaded in here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change something in here, and Webpack Dev Server is going to recognize that I've changed something in my source code, so it's going to automatically recompile it. Okay, and then once it's recompiled here, it's going to automatically cause this page to refresh. Okay, so watch me make the change here. Then watch the recompilation happen here, and then watch the reloading of the page over here, okay? So if I just make a change in here, okay, so it's recompiling, it's recompiled, and now it's reloading the page over here, okay? So that's what's happening. So if you're ever wondering, like, well, how come I can change my code and all of a sudden the browser knows that to have that or whatever? It's all because of this Webpack dev server, right? It's automatically recompiling, so it's not like there's some kind of magic where the browser can all of a sudden understand React and all this stuff. No, it's Webpack is automatically recompiling that for us. Okay, is this in a Node environment? Yes, it is in a Node environment. So it is in a Node environment. Once you have Node installed, you'll be able to set up Webpack through that using npm or yarn, and then you'll be able to configure Webpack to kind of create this React app. So Shadowman, yeah, definitely. I understand you missed the last couple ones, but definitely go back and look at my setting up React with Node, Webpack, and all that stuff. So, okay, yes, this is all in a Node environment, which basically means like we have Node running on our machine, and that's what's making all this possible, actually. Once we compile the code and send it out to the web, that's just regular JavaScript. It's really Node that's the power behind all this stuff. So, okay. So now that we understand what's going on here, I'm just going to minimize this because we don't really need it anymore. It's running in the background, but we don't really need to pay attention to that. Okay. So then we started to dive into actual React itself, okay? And last week we talked about creating what are called components. So components are kind of the building blocks of React. So almost everything that you build in React, you build as a component. And the best way to think about a component is basically it's like a custom HTML element that you're building. Okay, like I said, you have anchor tags, you have H1 tags, you have paragraph tags, you have all these kind of tags, and you're kind of building your own version of that. And what we talked about last week is this is how you build it. And the most basic version of a component has a render method. And a render method basically dictates exactly what is going to be output to the DOM, okay, or basically you can think of it as what is going to be placed into the HTML, okay, when you actually place this element in the document, okay. And the way we did that was by mounting the element. Okay, so rendering the element in what we call a mount point. Okay, so what we had here is we had this home.html page. Okay, this is the HTML page that we're starting with. And we had this div here. And the div basically was had an ID called alert link mount point. And what we did in the home.js is at the very end of the code, after we've built our class or whatever, what we're doing is we're basically instantiating, it's not really instantiating, but we're basically taking this component and we are inserting it inside that element. Well, that element, the way we got that is just with regular JavaScript saying get the element by the ID and then place this component inside that element. And when you place that component inside the element, it basically calls this render method, and then this render method will output what we talked about. Now, one of the things that we did last week too is we introduced the very first concept of React called properties or props, right? And so every component has a set of properties that you define, okay? And the way that you pass in properties into a component is they look like regular HTML attributes, okay? So here we have an HTML attribute where it's like text equals my link, and then we have alert text equals my alert, right? So we have these two properties, and when you pass them in like that, anywhere inside the component itself, you can call this dot props dot and then the property. Okay, so whatever text we passed into here is going to is going to be put right here because that's how we defined it right there. Okay, so hopefully that was just a review, but really quickly, this is how it works. So I have a component, and that component is going to mount to alert link mount point. Okay, so in the HTML file, I have an alert link mount point, and so we're going to place the component inside there. Okay, when you place a component inside there, it's going to call the render method. So whatever you have in the render method is going to output inside that element. Okay, so let's take a look at that. So when we look at the actual DOM here, okay, you'll see we have the alert link mount point. Okay, that's the div. And inside that is this code right here, the anchor href on click, that stuff. That stuff is sitting right here. Okay. And whatever you put here is going to render inside that. Okay, that's how you define your element. Now, when you're defining your element, you have the option of putting stuff in that element, and one of the ways you can do that is with the props. Okay, so anywhere in this class you can access the props, and again, the props come in as attributes right here. Okay. Okay, and then the last thing we talked about last week is this whole JSX language, which actually allows you to mix HTML combined with JavaScript. And it's kind of like if you're used to PHP, you have kind of like the question mark tags. You're used to like Java server pages. You have like the server-side tags, like the less than, % equals. Same thing with Rails. It's kind of similar to that. Now, the one thing I should mention about JSX is that JSX is not 100% exactly HTML. It's very close to HTML, but there are certain rules that make it just slightly different than HTML. Okay, so that's where we left off last week, and we kind of just built this. Dummy component here. Okay. Now, one of the things we should know about components is that components, at their very basic level, again, are custom HTML elements. In other words, they're kind of like elements that you can use over and over again, and they have certain visual aspects, and they have certain behavior, and again, they're reusable. And so when we think about components that way, normally we probably think about components as being a very small chunk of functionality. And in a lot of cases, that's true. Okay, so in this case, for example, I just have a link that whenever you click it, it pops up an alert text. Okay, and so that's a very small piece of functionality. And on the UI, it's a very small thing, right? It's just my link here, right? But that being said, there's nothing in React that says they have to be small, and there's nothing in React that says they have to be used in more than one place. Okay, and so when you get started playing kind of coding in React, you may also build really, really big components that take up maybe the entire screen, or maybe take up the entire DOM, they can take a really big amount of space, and they might have a lot of complex functionality in there. Okay. And the really nice thing about that is it basically allows you to basically code JavaScript in a kind of a more organized way. So yes, React at its core is really reusable components that have custom properties and state and all this stuff like that. But when you get started programming in React, it can be a lot more than that. And really, what me and my team found is we were using React basically anywhere where JavaScript got a little bit complicated. As soon as JavaScript got a little bit complicated, we were like, nope, we're going to create a React component for that. And this gave rise to kind of spreading out the React components to take up more and more of the page. Because if you think about it, we have a home.html page here, right? And a lot of this page, part of this page is There's a home link there. There's an about link. There's a contact link. And then there's this mount point. And then there's this JavaScript. So some of this is HTML. And then some of this is JavaScript, right? So when you look at the DOM here, this link is HTML. This is HTML. This is HTML. But inside the mount point, this is, yes, HTML, but it's generated from the React component, right? So one thing you should be asking yourself is, well, why can't we just code this whole page? Like, why can't we put the home link and this about link and all that stuff in the component, right? And the answer is you totally can. There's no reason why you wouldn't do that. And this kind of gives rise to what we call single page applications. Single page applications are basically, you just have one HTML page here, but what's happening is you have really complex JavaScript inside there that can do all the things that make it look like a page, like an application with multiple pages. And the thing about React that you should realize is that you can basically do anywhere in that spectrum. You can have a component that's as small as a single character on the screen that when you click it, it does something, to all the way being a full page and being an entire app. Okay, so you can do anywhere in between that. All right, and what we found at my team with me and my members is we started small and we would slowly expand that. Okay, so let me give you an example of that. So here, let's say I wanted these 3 links to be rendered by my home.js. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm expanding the scope of that component. So the scope, the component used to only render what was in here, and now I'm going to say, okay, well, I want it to render this stuff too. Okay, so what I can do is I can basically get rid of these links. Okay, so now I just have this mount point here, and I'm going to put those links into this here. Okay, so my component is no longer just an anchor tag. Okay, it's going to be a bit bigger than that. It's going to be a full div, let's say. Okay, and inside that div, I'm going to have looks like that didn't copy. Okay, copy that. Okay, I'll put those 3 links in here. We can do that because it's JSX. Okay, and then I'll put the alert tag right underneath that. There we go. Okay, now this React component is not just handling this link that's in here, it's also handling the stuff above it. Okay, so you see there it is. Now it looks slightly different because JSX again is not 100% HTML, but it's kind of getting close to what we had before there. Okay, and these links still work like normal. Okay, no big difference there. And then this link still does the alert. Okay, so basically what I'm doing at this point is I've shown you that React components can be as small as a link, or even smaller, by the way, or as big as the entire page if we wanted it to be. Okay, and as we kind of progress in this, we're going to do both. Actually, we're gonna code both. Okay. Now, the very first lesson I gave in this software talk was all about semantics, and all about how your naming and all that stuff should have your naming and all this stuff should have really good meaning. So now that this is actually basically the entire homepage and not just that little link there, the alert link, we should probably change the name of this. Okay, so this is no longer just the alert link. This is actually basically the home page. So I'm going to rename this component and call it homepage. Okay, and which would change this as well. Okay, so renamed it homepage. Let's see, make sure that still works. Okay, it still works, looks good. And the other thing is the file name doesn't really match. You know, it'd be nice if the file name matched this, okay? Now, if I do that, I do have to change my Webpack configuration because my configuration is looking for home.js. So I'm going to just call that homepage.js. and rename it to this. So it's going to look for the homepage.js and it's going to output it with the name homepage. So which means I have to change my HTML here as well. Okay, so that's configured. Let's see if that all works. Let me bring up that compile. Okay, so home.html. Whoops, did not remove these. And oh, because I changed the configuration, I actually have to start, or believe I have to restart the Webpack dev server. Get rid of this old file. And this should compile. Oh, what do we got here? Entry module not found, error can't resolve source homepage.js. Right, I didn't actually rename it. There we go. Compiling. There we go, that succeeded. There we go, it's working again. Okay. So this is one situation where, again, I'm creating a component that it's not really like this reusable element that I can place everywhere. It's just one really big element that I'm only going to use on the home page. But the really nice thing about it is it's going to allow me to do a lot of, it's going to allow me to code the kind of reactions and my JavaScript and all that stuff nicely in there. So, okay. Question. So what you just did caused everything on the home page to be in a React scope. Basically, yes. Not quite everything, like not the head and the body and all that stuff, but yes, everything beyond that I basically put into the home page. That is now part of this scope here. Okay. So let's kind of continue with this here. So we passed in the props into the home page, so that's kind of dictating this. And okay, so now I'm going to introduce you guys to another thing, another very powerful thing in React called state. So we're still kind of in the early phases here where we're just learning kind of React concepts and I'm kind of just playing around with them. Depending how time it goes or if we do it next week or whatever, I'm going to show you guys where we would actually use these things and where you use props and where you use state and the philosophy behind them. But right now, I'm just going to kind of play around with them and kind of show you the syntax and how they work. Okay. So we talked about props, and props are basically things that you pass in to the component itself. And the biggest thing about props that you should understand is that props relative to the component do not change. Okay, so once you're inside the component, so once I'm in here inside the component, the prop value does not change. Okay, so you may picture, like, again, a link, and the link has a certain piece of text, and if you click on it, the color changes or something like that. So the color may change, but the text doesn't change. So that would be a good candidate for prop. Okay, and we'll talk more about props and where to use them again later. But generally, just think about props do not change. Okay, again, inside the component. When we talk about props and state, we're always thinking inside the component relative to inside the component. Okay, so the second major piece that we talk about is state. Okay, and state is something that does change over the lifespan of the component. Okay, so while this component is sitting on the web page, state is something that you can use to change over time. Okay, so in the constructor of our component, we can set the state variable. Okay, and what the state variable is just an object. Okay, now for those of you who are not familiar with JavaScript, JavaScript objects are not, if you're coming from a kind of traditional object-oriented world like Java or C# or Python, I think for that matter, JavaScript objects are not like those objects. It's not like an instance of a class or anything like that. JavaScript objects are basically just like maps or dictionaries or hash maps. They're basically just key value pairs, okay? And the way you define them is you define them with two curly braces, and then you do a key and a value. Okay, so let's let's say we have a component here, and it's basically going to track the number of times we've clicked on the link inside it. Okay, so we have a link in here, and every time we click on this link, we want to keep track of the number of times that it's being clicked. Okay, so yes, the title of this component might not change, like the text. Okay, but internally, as we click on it, there's going to be a value that changes. Okay, so let's give that value a state variable, basically. So in here, we're going to say number of clicks. Okay, and in the constructor, we're going to initialize that to 0. Okay, so we've initialized that to 0. Okay. Now, just like props, state is basically accessible anywhere in this component. Okay, so just like how you can have this.props.text, we can have the number of clicks. Okay. By the way, the way I have this right now, it's a little bit confusing because we have this alert text and all this stuff, and this is kind of coming from when we had that alert link. This doesn't really make sense anymore, so I'm just going to clear out this alert text, and we're not going to pass in an alert text, but let's say we give this component, we'll call it like a title. Okay, so we'll pass in a property called title, and we'll say homepage clicks will be the title. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just kind of add a div in here, and then we'll put a header, and the header will be the title basically that we pass in. So this.props.title. Okay, so we pass in a prop called title, and then we can use that in here. And then this we'll deal with later, but it won't have a prop, so we'll just call it click here to increment counter. Okay, so let's just see what that looks like. Okay, so we have homepage clicks, and then we have click here to increment counter. Okay, so all I've done there is change the prop and use the prop in the render here. Okay. Okay, so we've got that. Okay, so like I said, the state variable is actually accessible anywhere in the render method, or anywhere actually in the entire class. So we could put that counter somewhere in here. Okay, so why don't we create a new div here, and we'll say the counter is currently at, and then we'll introduce some JavaScript in there, and we can call this .state .number of clicks. Okay, and there we go. Okay, so click here to increment counter. The counter is currently at 0. Okay, so there we have it. We have a state variable, and we can put it in there. Okay, doesn't seem that fancy. We have a variable, and we used it in the JSX. Okay, so what's fancy about that? I mean, I could have easily created another variable here. Let's say another variable, and I could have easily put that somewhere in the JSX as well. Right, so what's fancy about that? Like, why is this a big deal? Okay, I'll tell you why it's a big deal. Okay, the interesting thing about state is if you ever change the state using a special method, React automatically re-renders the component. It automatically calls this render method again. Okay, so it's going to automatically re-render this, and anything that's changed, props won't change because props don't change, but the state variable has changed, it'll re-render that with the new value. Okay, so let me show you how that works. Okay, so every time we click on this, we want it to increment. Okay, so we have a link here, and we're going to handle this with an onClick function. And again, back to semantics, this is not a great name for a function. Okay, so let's actually name this function a bit better. Okay, so we're going to create a function called handle increment link clicked. Okay, so this is the link that's being clicked. So we're going to call that in here, and we have to bind it. Okay, That way we can use the this keyword inside here and it will refer to the actual class and the state and the props and all that. Okay. So we have handle increment link clicked. So when we click on this, it's going to call this function right here. Okay, and let's make sure that actually works. So because it's a link, I'm actually going to prevent the default behavior of clicking a link. So the default behavior of clicking a link, right? Think about what happens when you click on a link in a browser in general. It will go to that href, right? So in this case, the href is a pound, which means it'll just jump to the top of the page, which in this case, we won't actually see anything, but we don't want that behavior. So prevent the default behavior of actually going to the href. And then let's just put an alert and see if this actually works. Okay, so if I click here to increment counter, that is not working. So something's not working there. Okay, so we have handle increment link clicked. Okay, so handle increment link clicked, which should come to here. Did I have a typo on any of those? Don't think so. And we bound it to the, well, we're not even calling this in here anyways, so that should be okay. What am I missing there? On click this dot handle increment link clicked. It's the event. Bound it to this. Something. What am I missing there? This dot on click. Oh, sorry, I called the argument event instead of e, so this is really what we want. But mind you, that still should have hit the alert. So let's see what's going on. Oh, because it probably hit that as an error and then didn't get to that. Right. Okay, there we go. Okay. So this is hooked up properly. When we click on this link, it's going to run this function right here. Okay. Now what we can do is React components come with this special method called setState. Okay. So you don't edit the state directly. Okay. So you don't do this. You don't set number of clicks equals to this dot state dot number of clicks plus 1. Okay. That won't actually do anything. Well, it'll update the state variable, but it won't have this side effect of re-rendering this, okay? And we actually do want this to re-render because basically this is going to render onto the DOM and it's going to show you the number of clicks. If you change that number of clicks, that DOM's out of date, so you want it to re-render, okay? So the way to do that automatically is to call a function called setState. And what setState takes in is an object, okay? And that object is basically any variables that you want to update in the state. Okay, so if we want to update number of clicks, we can say number of clicks, the new value, let's say, is 1. Okay, and what that's going to do is as soon as you call setState, it's going to increment, it's not going to increment, it's going to set the value to 1. And because you've done it through setState, it's going to recall this render method again. Okay, so I'm going to click on the link, which is going to call this function. This function is going to call setState, which is going to update the number of clicks. And then as a side effect, it calls the render method again. Okay? So watch. Okay, so the component mounts and render is called, and that's why we have what we have in here right now. Okay? So we have the div, and we have the counter is currently at 0. Okay? When I click on this, it's going to call this function, which is going to call setState, and that is going to change the number, which is going to have the side effect of calling render again. Okay, so I'm going to click on it, and it got set to 1. Okay, now I want to kind of hang on this for a little bit because I really want you guys to for this to sink in because this becomes a pretty important concept later on. This idea of render being called again and again. Okay, so in the render method, I'm actually just going to output a console.log here to show you how many times render is actually being called. Okay, so what should happen is when we mount the component for the very first time, React components are going to call this render method. And then anytime you call set state, it's going to call that again, okay? So if I go to the console here, okay, let it refresh. Okay, render is called, okay? So the very first time you mount a component, the render method gets called, okay? Now, if I click on the button is going to call set state. And then set state is going to change the variable and then call render again. Okay, so if I click on this, you'll see render is called again. And every time I click on this, you'll see, this is incrementing here, render is being called again and again and again and again and again. Okay? So there's a couple of things to absorb here. Okay, so first of all, you do not have to explicitly re-render whatever is in your component. Okay, if you call set state, it's going to re-render it for you. Okay, and this means that we have kind of this different way of programming our user interface. Okay, for those of you who are used to using jQuery or regular JavaScript to interact with the DOM, you'd probably do commands that manipulate the DOM directly. Okay, you'd probably say, okay, go find this div and replace this whatever's inside there with the inner HTML. This counter is currently, and then you pass in a number and you would do that, right? So this is different. So what we do here is we actually set up the user interface from the beginning, and we kind of place, the variables where we need them, and we actually call set state, and then it will automatically kind of re-render it. Okay, so we actually don't have any code in here that says to manipulate the DOM, right? We don't have any code in here that says go find this div and replace it with that, right? We just have a declaration of our entire user interface, how it's going to look, and all we're doing is saying, okay, if I change any of the variables in here, just re-render it. Okay, this is what we call declarative UI. Okay, where you're stating the entire user interface up front, and the only thing that your actions actually do is modify the data. Okay, and if you think about it, if you ever used to kind of Web 2.0, this is the same kind of philosophy that we use. Okay, if you're using Rails, C#.NET, any of these things, when you create those web pages, what you typically do is you lay out the entire HTML and you have spots of data in there, right? And what you do is you refresh the page, and depending on what the data is at that time, it'll fill it in with the appropriate things. Right? That's how we use templates in kind of Web 2.0 kind of frameworks, right? Well, React kind of adopts that same thing, just kind of in a different level. Okay, kind of like it's more on the client side, but basically it's the same idea where it's like if I change the data, okay, I can basically refresh the page. You're not really refreshing the page, you're just refreshing that one component, but you're basically refreshing the entire component and saying anything that's changed now replace with the new values. Okay, so if you're coding React, if you ever catch yourself doing DOM manipulation, and what I mean by that is like find this div or find this element with this class and change it and change this or whatever. If you ever find you're doing stuff like that, chances are you're not doing it in the proper declarative UI or React way. Okay? Instead, what you should be doing is setting up the DOM to be based on some variables, and then you're going to be changing the variables. Okay? So typically the way I deal with React is I always think about, okay, I set up my UI, and if I need something that's dependent, that needs to switch back and forth with something or whatever, then what I do is, I'll set that up in the render, and then based on that state variable, I'll change that state variable somewhere else, okay? And then all your click handlers and all your interactions and all your AJAX calls and all that stuff should only be dealing with state variables, okay? And then what will happen is render will automatically be called again. Okay, so that's what declarative UI is. All right, so again, take home lesson there is if you find yourself in React manipulating the DOM directly, probably not doing it the kind of best practice way. Okay. Okay, this will become more clear the more we do this, okay? But you can see that's exactly what I've done here, right? I have a piece of user interface that is dependent on a state variable. And then all I'm doing in my handler is actually just changing that state variable. I'm not actually doing anything with the DOM itself. I'm just changing the state variable. And then React will automatically call render again. Okay, another indication of this happening is you can look at the inspector and you can see this happening in real time. Okay, so if I expand this here, okay, let's refresh the page. Okay, so I have the counter as 0 here, okay? All right, so if I click on this, look down here and look what happens to the DOM. Okay, so that flashed and that changed, okay? And that was React calling render again for the whole thing. Okay, so now the question becomes, well, Casey, if render was called fully, the whole thing again, how come only the one changed? Like only the one flashed? How come the rest of this DOM stuff didn't flash? Okay. If you're thinking that, good thinking. Okay. So this is an interesting thing that came out of React. So it turns out that DOM manipulation and DOM operations are actually very expensive. And what I mean by expensive is they're not very performant. They take a long time to do. And if you do a lot of them, it's going to really slow down your app and take up a lot of resources. Okay. So if I were to click on this and every single time it re-renders this DOM, that actually is going to be very expensive. And you can imagine this is a pretty simple component. If this is a big component with a lot of divs and all this stuff like that, it'd be very costly to re-render the whole thing. But the really nice advantage of re-rendering the whole thing is you're in a nice predictable state. This is the whole advantage of Declarative Ui. Declarative UI, it's like, again, hitting the refresh button for a web app. You're re-rendering the whole thing, okay? And so you know exactly what state you're in. So how do you balance really expensive DOM manipulation with re-rendering the whole thing every single time the state changes? Every single time the state changes, you're going to re-render the whole thing. That's going to be really expensive, okay? So when Facebook was developing React, this was a problem that they dealt with. And the way they did it is they created what's called a virtual DOM. Okay, so they kind of created their own version of the DOM. Okay, so the DOM, again, is the browser's in-memory object representation of the document. Okay, so all these divs and anchors and attributes and all this stuff, that's the browser has that stored in memory in this DOM. Okay. But again, manipulating that object and its subsequent render to the view is very expensive. So what React did is they created a virtual DOM that sits beside that DOM, sits beside the real DOM, okay? And when you call re-render, okay, every time you call render, you're not actually affecting the real DOM, you're affecting what's called the virtual DOM, okay? So I kind of lied when I said render is called fully again and re-rendering the entire DOM of that element. No, it's actually just affecting this virtual DOM. In other words, it's this other data structure that Facebook has created that looks probably very similar to the real DOM. Okay, so what render does is it actually affects the virtual DOM. Okay, well then how does the virtual DOM update the real DOM? Well, after the virtual DOM is re-rendered, then what React does is it compares the two. It says, okay, what has actually changed between the real DOM and the virtual DOM? And whatever has changed, only do that DOM manipulation. Okay? And that's how React works. Okay, that's how the virtual DOM works. Okay? If that wasn't really that interesting to you, don't worry about it. You don't really think about it in day-to-day coding. But it's good to know a little bit about the internals. What I said before about affecting the state and changing and calling re-render, that is actually the more important take-home lesson. Okay, so this is not exactly... any questions, by the way, feel free to ask. Again, I'm always watching the Q&A here, so. Okay, so this is... we found a way to change the state variable, and what that does is it recalls render, okay, and with the new variable, so that's good. But this is not exactly doing what we want it to do, right? We want it to increment every single time we click it. Like right now, it sets it to 1, and every time you click it, it's just setting it to 1, setting it to 1, setting it to 1, right? So just a little bit of logic there that we can change. So let's get the current number of clicks. So what we can do is we can get the current number of clicks. Okay, so assign it to a variable and just do number of clicks plus 1. Okay, so this is the current state variable, whatever it is at that time. And then we set the new one equal to that plus 1. Okay, so let's take a look at that. All right, so now we should be able to click it. And now it's just increasing. Okay, perfect. Okay, so that's how the state works. Okay, little bit of an aside. If you guys are new to ES 2015, you can actually shortcut this statement right here. If you ever are assigning a variable with the same name as what you're extracting from an object, okay, this can be shortened to this. It's called destructuring. Okay, so anytime you see a statement like this, just think of it as you're calling this variable on the object over here, and you're assigning it to a variable with the same name. Okay, but that's just a little ES 2015 bit. I'm just going to leave that out for now. Okay, and there we go. All right, let's make sure this still works. Did I save that? Okay, cool. Oh, and we are not preventing the default. That's why the hash is appearing there. So if the hash is not there, then yeah, we're not jumping there. Okay, perfect. Okay, let's continue with this. Let's say once the counter hits 20, we want to change the color of the text here. Okay, so let's introduce a little bit of CSS in here actually. So yes, I could put it in the source and compile it out here. I'm just going to be a little bit lazy and put some CSS directly in the HTML page, just for now, because to be honest, I'm not very familiar with how to import the CSS through Webpack, so I'm just going to be lazy here. So I'm just going to create something here, and here's the counter, and let's give it a class. Okay, so we're going to give it a class, and we'll say this is the counter statement. Okay, or counter blurb. Okay, now very first thing you're going to learn about JSX, about how it's not exactly related to, sorry, it's not one-for-one exactly HTML. Okay. One of the very few things it's not exactly HTML is you cannot actually use the word class. Okay, you actually have to use class is reserved. Okay, I'm assuming because we use classes up here, like JavaScript classes. So one of the very few things here is what you have to do is you have to use class name. Okay. So class name is the equivalent of what you would typically put in class when you do like CSS selectors. Okay, so I'm just going to put a blurb there, and let's say counter blurb. Okay, so let's just set the color to blue to start off with. Let's see if all that works. Okay, so it's blue. Maybe blue is not a great color because of all the links. Let's make it green. Okay, so it's green right now. Okay, and let's say after it hits 20, we're gonna make it red. Okay, and the way we're gonna do that is we're gonna just have another class on it. Okay, so we'll say the counter blurb, if it is we'll call it like above. We'll say we'll call it you know, it's hot. Okay, when it's hot, we'll say the color is red. Okay, so if there's a class of hot on that, then it's going to be red. Okay. So the question is, how do we introduce a class that's red in here? Okay, so you might, again, if you're used to DOM manipulation, you might start by doing something like this. Okay, so we're going to set the state Okay, so maybe, okay, you know what? Why don't we'll say a new number of clicks, and that's number of clicks plus 1. So we're going to set that as the new number of clicks. Okay, and we'll say, okay, if the new number of clicks is greater than 20, okay, you know, maybe we get, you know, the element, and we'll say document, there's like a way to get like elements by class, and we'll get the counter blurb. Okay, and then we will add the class. There's a way to get the classes, and we'll add hot to it. Okay, all right. Now, some of you guys should be thinking, well, hold on. What are you doing there? And that's exactly right. I'm actually doing this to demonstrate a point. This is exactly what you do not want to do in React. This is not declarative UI. Okay, this is, I don't know what the word is. It's almost like procedural UI, where you're like doing a process of manipulating the DOM. Okay, this is not what we want to do. This is exactly what we want to avoid. Okay, anything that affects the DOM should already be in here. Okay, and then dependent on changes to the state variables. Okay, so this is exactly what we don't want to do. Okay, so let's get rid of this. So we'll get back to what we had, which was just changing the number of clicks. Okay. Okay, so now down here though, this is where we can use that value to determine what we're going to place in here. Okay. So there's a couple ways around this. Let's start with kind of the longer version, but maybe a little bit easier to understand. Okay, so why don't here, okay, I'm going to create a new method or a function, and it's going to be called, let's call it counter blurb class name. Okay, it's going to take in nothing. And since we need to access state or props, I'm going to bind it. So counter blurb class name equals counter blurb class name, and we bind it to this. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is, instead of just hard coding counter blurb in here, I'm actually going to pass in a function. Sorry, not a function. I'm actually going to call a function. Okay, so I'm going to call this function, and this function is going to return something. So to start off with, I could just return counter blurb. Okay, so let's make sure that works. Okay, looks good. So, I mean, pretty simple, right? Like, we are basically creating a function, and that function is returning counter blurb. So counter blurb gets inserted in here, right? And we can just double check to make sure that's the case. Okay, so counter blurb is right there. Perfect. Okay. So what we could do is, in here, we can introduce some logic. So we could say, okay, so if the state number of clicks is greater than 20, then return counter blurb and hot. Otherwise, return counter blurb just by itself. There we go. Okay, so we got that there. So what's going to happen? Okay, so remember, this render gets called every single time I change the state. So when I click on this here, it's going to call handle link clicked, which is going to call this.setState and set a new value higher than 1 before that. So what you should really be processing there is, because I'm using this.setState every time I click, this render gets called again. And every single time render is being called, counter blurb class name is being called. Okay? So counter blurb class name is now going to look at what the current number of clicks is and either return counter blurb hot or counter blurb. So really what you can think about is, every time I click on this is going to have a new value based on whatever the value output is here. Okay, so let's see if that works. Okay, so it's just incrementing. And you can see counter blurb's not changing because the virtual DOM hasn't changed. But then once I get to 20, okay, so 20 itself is still not greater than 20. But once I click on 20 again, you'll see there it goes. Okay, now because it's greater than 20, counter blurb class name actually returns counter blurb hot, which then will return blurb hot there. Okay, so what I've done here is this is still declarative UI, okay, because this is just relegating the logic of this out to a different function. But in this function itself, there's no getting an element and manipulating the DOM or anything like that, okay? All of this is happening just because I'm changing the state, okay? Again, that's always the way you want to think. I'm going to change the state, and that's going to update the UI for me, okay? I really think the term react is a great name for it because that's really what it is. It's like you're changing the state and it's reacting to that, okay? Okay, I'm just going to shortcut this a little bit. Okay, so for those of you who are familiar with ternary statements, this shouldn't be too hard to simplify this. We can basically say return, and then we say this.state.number of clicks, if that is greater than 20. Okay. If it's greater than 20, we return something else, we return something else. Okay, so if it's greater than 20, we'll return counter blurb, and otherwise we'll return counter blurb and hot. Let's see if that works. Oh, wait, that's, if it's greater than 20, return counter blurb. Oh, that's wrong. Greater than 20, return counter blurb, otherwise just return regular. All right, and then once it gets past 20, we are red. Okay, perfect. Okay, maybe we'll just go to 10 so I don't have to click so many times. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. And here's the thing. This is just JavaScript, right? This is just JavaScript. So, and JSX allows us to put JavaScript directly in HTML as long as we put the curly braces there. So rather than creating this whole new function, I could literally just take whatever I'm returning, cut it out of here, and put it directly in here. And I don't need that function anymore, and I don't need this function anymore to be bound. And there we go. Okay. So there we go. So that is kind of a brief introduction to state, okay? Again, the biggest take home here is that state is something that changes within the component. So something that you do in the component is going to change a state variable. And then the other take home is that really state is going to cause, sorry, this.setState is going to cause render to be called again. Okay. So the reason I kind of introduced this here, this kind of syntax here, this is just regular JavaScript, but we actually end up using a lot of this style of syntax in our JSX. JSX, again, it's not full-blown JavaScript in here, so you can't exactly do if conditions, and you can't exactly do loops the way you normally would. But there's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of tricks to doing what you need to do. And one of the tricks you can do is ternary statements. Ternary statements are a really nice way to kind of do an if-else statement. So, okay, so I think that is actually a really good place to stop. So hopefully you guys understand state a little bit now. I'm going to commit this and push it up to GitHub. But we're going to kind of be building on this more and more, this idea of state and this idea of props. And then we're going to kind of dive more into reusable components. Okay, so components that we can kind of scatter multiple places or whatever, right? But hopefully that you can see how state works and how props work. Yeah, That's pretty much it. Okay, so I'm gonna stop there, guys. But definitely, I'm gonna hang around as we always do. We'll spend the next 10, 15 minutes, even longer, talking about other topics. If you guys have any questions about what's going on here with React, or if you have any questions about anything else, I already see some chat going on about Vue. Again, very interested to see how Vue works. Maybe that's what we maybe that's what me and Dave end up doing. Maybe Vue is a good place to kind of program, or Dave, maybe even if you want to do a full blown lesson yourself, very open to that. A lot of talk about Vue, so it'd be very interesting to see how Vue works versus React and how different they are and how similar they are. I'm curious, Dave, just what you've been dealing with so far and what you've seen so far with React. Um, is it kind of similar philosophies? Is it kind of similar ideas, or is it pretty different? I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on that, actually. But he did say I'm pretty convinced that it is the best framework, especially with Vue 3, which will be released in the next couple of months. So yeah, very interested to hear that. Any questions from anybody? Any questions? Any suggestions? Any ideas for future talks? Definitely here. Oh, I got 7 people watching right now. Any clarification about any of the stuff that I just went over? I know there was a lot there, but happy to go over some of that stuff again if there needs any clarification there. All right. There are similarities for sure. Okay, interesting to know that there are similarities between Vue and React. Yeah, I'm actually it's very. Whoops, not Vus. So this is Vue again. This is I think a competitor to React. I think it is a Vue only kind of component based framework. Oh wait, how they manage state and components and how they do templates. Okay, so different ways to do state and templates. So they have declarative rendering as well. So I'm curious, Dave, is it just a syntax difference? Like, is the idea the same in terms of the templates? Um, and is it just like syntactically different? And then state management is also different. So text interpolation. Interesting stuff there. Anyways, I'm not gonna just have you. Oh, again, I always forget to switch this. Sorry, I'm just looking at Vue is what I'm looking at right now. So, they're just saying I'm pretty sure the way Vue.js does templates gives them advantage in terms of performance. Oh, okay, interesting. Cool. Any questions? Anything else that you guys want to talk about? Don't be shy. Happy to talk about anything. Again, doesn't have to be specifically about React or Vue. Can really be about anything. And I encourage if there's any quote noobs or like if there's any like kind of basic questions that you just didn't know when I was typing something that didn't make sense. Those always lead to great discussions as well. I feel I'm definitely in this camp when it comes to like when I was coding JavaScript for a really long time, actually back when I was working with Dave. There's so many things about JavaScript I didn't understand. So definitely, don't hesitate to ask things that don't make sense. And even to this day, there's still a couple things about JavaScript that I really don't understand. So That being said, Vue's native libraries are not as mature as React. Oh, interesting. Okay, cool, cool. Yeah, anything about Webpack, Webpack Dev Server, React, JavaScript, even HTML, web requests, web servers, anything, guys. Happy to chat. I'm obviously trying to just kill the time here to give people the opportunity to ask questions. Um, yeah, it's. I mean, again, React, and I'm sure Vue probably has the same benefits. One of the biggest things, like I find that's really nice about React are things like declarative UI, things like kind of component reuse, and things like separation of concerns, where you're putting all your JavaScript and HTML in one place, actually, and kind of creating this kind of encapsulated set of functionality and user interface together, right? One of the biggest things I remember from one of the early React videos was this idea how we talked about separation of concerns, but really we were doing separation of technologies. Separation of concerns, the idea, I believe, I'm not really 100% certain on the word concerns, but the way I interpret it is separation of concerns, like literally what are you concerned about, or like when you're dealing with kind of a set of functionality or a specific place, like when you're dealing with, say, the orders page and everything to do with the orders page, right? Should be separated from everything to do with the users page, right? But a lot of times, with the way we code web, is we put all the CSS together, and then we put all the JavaScript together, and then we put all the HTML together. So we're not really separating the concern. We're actually separating the different technologies, and all the CSS for all the different components are put together, and all the JavaScript of all the different components are put together, and all the HTML components are put together. So what happens is when you're coding one page, you kind of have to go to 3 different places to figure out things, right? And this kind of came out of this whole unobtrusive JavaScript where it was kind of annoying to put the JavaScript directly in the HTML. Like that wasn't really great either. So kind of putting it all encapsulated in one place is actually a really nice thing. And it is interesting hearing the talk about it, because they would say, I know this is kind of a contradictory idea, but go with us on it. And I think it's a really, really good way to go. And so, those kind of those philosophies, like declarative UI, reusable components, declarative UI, reusable components, and separation of concerns. These things, again, the thing I always say about React, and I'm sure Vue has the same benefit. It's amazing how very few set of concepts have brought an incredible amount of sanity to my JavaScript code. It's so much easier to deal with my JavaScript code, and my JavaScript code is so much more stable. Like it's incredible. It's incredible how much declarative UI stabilizes your JavaScript. Like your applications run so smooth, so fast, and so predictable. Like everything just works. Like it's so much fewer bugs actually happen with these couple philosophies, which is really great. Now, React's not perfect. Last week we talked about some of the instability of React, and not necessarily instability of the things crashing, but instability with their actual philosophies and their code and their format and their syntax. In a very short time, that they've been around, they've changed pretty major pieces of how to use React. If you learn React brand new today, your code probably look very different from what I showed here, actually. So I was lucky to get in on the pretty close to the ground floor, so I've kind of evolved as things have evolved. But even I'm falling behind these days. And what's interesting about React too, and this is probably not unique to React as a kind of downfall, is it's really interesting to do the mind shift to declarative UI beyond kind of some of the simple stuff. So I just showed you kind of very simple example declarative UI. You set the state somewhere and then re-render gets called. But if you start thinking about things like page redirection and stuff like that, declarative UI gets kind of funny to understand. When you start using React components to dictate which page you're navigating to and stuff like that, and redirecting to pages and stuff. Sometimes the understanding is not super intuitive, I find. Like React developers seem to do really well with it, and they seem to program really well with it. But if I were coding my own kind of component that did some of the things that people are doing, I think it'd be a little bit unintuitive, to be honest. So, especially things like animation, like how React deals with animation is a little bit, it it doesn't seem super obvious to me how React animation is dealt with. So again, it's not perfect, but I definitely love it. And again, it's paved the way to React Native, which is really, really awesome. Actually, I'm really happy with the state of React Native right now. It's a really nice way to develop mobile apps. And now what's weird is, again, you can develop web apps with React Native. So Sean Floyd saying that's fair. The only time I felt it could be useful is for view templates, but not worth importing an entire extra library. Based on how the new Facebook web app performs on this old laptop, it's hot garbage. I'd be very interested in a comparison to see each framework's performance, especially on older devices. Yeah, be very, very interesting, actually. Yeah, that's the thing you have to consider when you're dealing with libraries like this is for all this to work, don't forget, this gets transpiled into this JavaScript here. And then on top of that, on top of that, actually, where is my JS file? That's strange. I don't know where that JS file went. On top of that, again, it needs all of the code that's coming along with React and all this to make this work, right? So there's a lot of extra code that's coming along with it, right? So it's definitely not like for free, right? There's definitely stuff that's coming across there, right? So hopefully tools like Webpack help a little bit with that, because don't forget, like Webpack, you're compiling this on a desktop or a laptop or a server or whatever, and you're not like anything that doesn't come along with that doesn't come like Webpack is not used on the web server itself, right? So things like that. So yeah, definitely an interesting time for JavaScript development. There's a lot of new technologies coming out, and definitely everybody has their opinion. But I myself, again, I can't honestly say which one's better or worse because I really haven't used both. It's like when you're talking about React Native versus Flutter. I can't say if Flutter or React Native is better because I haven't used both, right? Like, and I haven't used, and even people who use both, it's interesting. Like, you don't typically use both in a comparable amount of time or comparable amount of experience, right? So sometimes it's hard to tell that way. Now, obviously, you can like read up on things and certain things you like and certain things you don't like. But yeah, it's hard for me to say which one is better because I really haven't used both in an extensive capacity, right? So I will say this though, what I really like about React, and I'm assuming Vue, and I've said this before, what I like about those versus Angular and Ember and I don't know what else, but there are certain JavaScript frameworks that are full-blown client-side MVC that really kind of need you to do all your front end in that framework. It's just kind of like choosing Ruby on Rails, right? Like Ruby on Rails, if you choose Ruby on Rails as your web framework, you're kind of like you're in that entire framework and everything kind of works together, right? It would be hard to introduce Ruby on Rails in like one part of your bigger server application. That wouldn't really make sense. Like Ruby on Rails is a full web framework, right? So you have to choose it from the beginning. And the same thing goes for things like Angular. Angular is a full client-side framework. So the idea is that your entire client side is done in Angular, right? Now, I'm assuming, because I haven't used Angular myself, but I did try Ember, and it was definitely the case with Ember. What I really like about Vue and React, I've said this before, is they can be really small pieces of your app. They can be a really tiny piece of your app, which makes it incredibly easy to experiment. And I'm always a really big fan of any framework or any library that you can get up and running in a really, really quick time. This week, actually, I started using Algolia. Algolia is a search, it's a search provider. And I was really impressed with it, actually, how fast you could get something up and running. Um, I've used things like Elasticsearch, and they weren't nearly as impressive in terms of getting things up and running in a really quick way. This is Algolia, and definitely it's not perfect, but I'm really impressed so far. And I always like libraries and frameworks and tools that do this because it makes it makes trying them out and seeing how far you can get with it really easy, right? Like you can just get like Stripe is another good example. Stripe payment processor, they make it really easy to get up and running, to kind of get a checkout and accept payments. It's so simple with Stripe, right? I really like libraries and frameworks and tools and services that do stuff like this. So that's the kind of thing with React, and I'm assuming Vue, is that it's really quick to get something up and running and seeing how it works. And I think just like any MVP, it's like you kind of need just a little bit to use it, and then that entices you to use it more and give feedback and all this stuff like that, right? So that's why I really am a big fan of these frameworks like Vue and React. So again, a lot of assumptions in that last statement because I haven't used Vue or Angular, but I'm pretty sure that's semi-accurate. So any other questions, guys? Any other discussion happening? I know we still got a bunch of people online here. Happy to chat about anything. And by the way, at some point, I am thinking of doing some of these sessions on Ruby on Rails. Um, Ruby on Rails is definitely a lot bigger to teach and to talk about, um, but it is ultimately like a really incredible framework, and it's really what changed my software life. Ruby on Rails like completely flipped my software life. I was definitely in a place where I felt inadequate when it came to software development. I definitely felt like very inferior to any other software developer talked to, sorry. Um, and I definitely felt like I was at a point where I just really didn't like software, and I think it had a lot to do with um, feeling inadequate and I don't know, just like doing stuff that didn't. I don't know. I never felt like I was a good coder, and I never felt like I could execute. Um, I don't know. I just wasn't passionate about it. I couldn't execute my vision. Definitely was in a place where software I think was kind of out of my like I felt like it was going to be out of my life. But Ruby on Rails, when I started learning it, it started off as this thing where I felt like, hey, I'm kind of a little bit on the leading edge, even though Ruby on Rails had been out for a long time at that point. But I still felt like not a lot of people knew it, and it was kind of this new thing. And not only that, not only feeling like I was on the cutting edge and knew it, but um, one of my phrases that I always use is that I felt that Ruby on Rails is one of these frameworks that can move at the speed of my creativity. So if I had an idea, it was very easy for me to whip up an app and actually start coding on it, right, and just kind of working on it. And there's three things that I think I've come across since Ruby, like including Ruby on Rails, that I felt have done that for me. So Ruby on Rails has done that. Services like Heroku, I know Heroku is not the only one, but Heroku is another one that's done that. And Expo for mobile development is another thing that's done that, where it's just so quick to get a project started and go with it. And so Ruby on Rails really changed my software life, where for the first time I started getting really passionate about software, and has led me to a point now where, like, I was just telling my wife for the last couple of weeks how much I love my job. Like, I love coding right now, and I love web development and mobile development, and it's super super fun. But really, the catalyst for that was Ruby on Rails. So I really feel like I'd like to do a couple of sessions on Ruby on Rails. I feel like even just one session on getting Ruby on Rails set up with RVM, and talking about gem sets and stuff like that, I think that would be pretty valuable. Because one of the biggest kind of hurdles with Ruby on Rails is actually setup. Like, environment setup can be a little bit of a hurdle, especially on non-Linux or non-Unix based systems. It can be a little bit of a hurdle. But once you get Ruby on Rails set up, it's so nice actually to get a web app up and running. And I don't know if you guys know Local Eats Ottawa. It's a website that me and my friend actually developed. I think it's .com. I can't remember. So Local Eats Ottawa is this website that we developed, and this was kind of just at the cusp of COVID-19 and kind of getting really serious. And we kind of came up with this idea of it'd be nice to have a summary of what kind of takeout and delivery services restaurants offered. It's actually been one of the more successful projects, kind of pet projects that I've worked on. It started getting noticed by a lot of people, which is really great. Anyways, this idea was literally like, so I meet with my friend every Wednesday to kind of code or work on ideas, and he just kind of mentioned it in passing. Like he's like, "Oh, that'd be cool. I always thought it'd be cool to have an app like this." And within like 2 hours, we had the MVP built. Yeah, it was literally like 2 to 3 hours. I think that night we had it built, and a big part of that is Ruby on Rails. The fact that Ruby on Rails is set up the way it was really, really quick to build this actually. So it's a very impressive framework, and I've definitely realized some of its downfalls recently. But in talking to Dave again, Dave was smart to point out that there aren't really other frameworks that do everything that Rails can do that are comparable, right? Like I've been making the comparison recently with React to Rails, but more on a philosophical level than an actual, because obviously React and Rails solve very different problems, but more on a philosophical level of like, effort and learning curves versus output and stuff like that. But if you really look at everything that Ruby on Rails can do, I think I have to agree with Dave that there are very, very few, if any, frameworks that are as powerful and are as good as Ruby on Rails. Ruby on Rails, unlike I think anything I've ever dealt with before, has made me a better programmer. That's the thing. Like Ruby on Rails, you probably get this with a lot of opinionated frameworks, but it kind of guides you in a way to do things a certain way, and then you kind of leave Ruby on Rails with a really good, like without even knowing it, you're kind of getting trained to do things in best practices. I just took over a React project, and I started converting it basically not into Rails, but into Rails like kind of principles. And it's not that Rails invented a lot of these principles. It's just Rails uses them in a really nice, elegant way, which kind of trains you to use them elsewhere. So, all right, cool. All right, so it looks like there's no more questions really. I'm just kind of babbling at this point. I'm just going to wrap up here, but if you guys have any more questions, feel free to post them as I'm chatting. But I want to thank everybody for joining. Dave's saying, in his opinion, the approachability of Rails is unmatched. Yeah, that's definitely true. It's definitely unmatched. Yeah, you can really. It's again like one of these things where you can just kind of get up and running really, really quickly. Provide your environment setup gets going. It's really nice, and yeah, it's definitely really cool. Dave has been programming Rails since like way back in the day. Listen to our podcast, you'll find out all about that. But yeah, so anyways, if you guys haven't already, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to be notified anytime I go live. Again, Thursdays generally at 8 p.m. If there ever is a show that's being canceled, I will try to find effective ways to inform you guys. Last week, what I did is I literally had a live stream that said the show's canceled. That seems a little bit cumbersome, so it might be just on Twitter. So definitely look on Twitter. If you ever show up at the stream and for some reason it's not there, just check Twitter. I will announce if a show has been canceled. Definitely really really try to kind of be active on that. Again, if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, anything like that, leave them here. Leave them on a past video. Leave them on Twitter. That'd be good. Dave's saying, when you get deeper into Rails and more experience, you tend to become a bit blind to how easy it is to do the basics. Yeah, it's very true. Yeah, when you've kind of been programming Rails and you're working on bigger apps and you've been working on the same app for a really long time, you're doing some really deep stuff, and you do forget how easy it is to do some of the really really basic things. You know, it's kind of cool every time you kind of teach someone new about Rails and you tell them how easy certain things are. It's like it's really crazy. What I find really impressive about Rails is I wouldn't be surprised if I've only scratched 10% of Rails, to be honest. Maybe even lower. Like what I find impressive about Rails is I'm still finding new things that it does that solve problems that I've been trying to solve manually for a really long time. I only maybe this year, very recently, I can't remember when it was, but I very recently learned about active record dirty, which is a way to track changes that you've made to a model. And I never knew that existed before. And it solves so many of my coding, not problems, but like a lot of ugly manual code. And the nice thing about Rails, I find, is more and more like they seem they've figured out everything. Like everything that you want to do in a web application, they seem to have figured out, and it's just a matter of getting to know it. That's one of the things. So, but anyways, thanks everybody for joining. I'm very happy after a break that we've actually had one of our higher turnouts. So 7 people, yeah. I mean, usually we're in the neighborhood of under 3 or 4. And I know people watching this do watch this recorded afterwards. So I do appreciate those people who watch afterwards as well. I know Thursday at 8 p.m. isn't convenient for everybody. So I really want to thank everybody for joining. I really want to thank all you guys for chatting. I want to thank the regular viewers. You guys are very kind to listen to me for so long and entertain me. Again, I really do benefit from this. It's great for me. I really enjoy this. And so I really appreciate you guys, joining, chatting, giving your insight. It's really great. And hopefully, you guys are connecting a little bit as well, right? So definitely lots of people from different walks of my life. So really, really appreciate that. And again, appreciate to the people who do watch this recorded afterwards. So thanks so much, guys. I'm going to end it there. Maybe we'll do a Vue React comparison, or maybe we just get Dave to just teach us a little bit of Vue. Maybe that's the way we do it. Again, we'll have to figure out a way to do the technicals behind that, but I think it would be great. Okay, so thanks so much, everybody. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to hit the bell icon. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter, whatever, all that stuff. Thanks everybody for joining. Thanks everybody for chatting. Everybody who chatted, Ricky, Commander, Puggle, Sean, great to hear from you again. Shadow Man, don't think I forgot anybody there. And then anybody else who's watching, even if you didn't chat, I totally understand. Sometimes you just want to chill out or privacy reasons, whatever it may be. Thanks everybody. Have a great weekend. Stay safe. It's getting really hot out there, so also be careful of the heat. But we will see you guys in the next one. And if you're interested, I am having a concert, not this Saturday, but next Saturday. You can check that out at 7 p.m. Eastern as well. Spread the word. That's another thing I would really love if you guys could help me out on. LinkedIn has been great. People have been liking my posts on LinkedIn. But if you can spread the word to other software developers, whatever your channels may be, I would really love to increase the viewership and engagement on this. So really appreciate it, guys. It's been week number 8 or 9 or something like that. So it's really great we've been keeping this going. But thanks so much, everybody. Thanks, everybody. Hey, Mark, another regular viewer. Great to see him. We will see you guys. Hope you guys are having a good summer. Hopefully things are going great. I've been really enjoying my summer. Obviously, can't get out, but I've been enjoying the live streaming and a lot of the coding that I've been doing, and it's been really great. So thanks so much again, guys. We'll see you guys next Thursday at 8 p.m. I think we're going to continue on React. We're only starting to scratch the surface of React, but we may talk with Dave about Vue and stuff like that. We'll figure it out. Okay, thanks so much. That's it. We'll see you guys later.